My boots still had this morning's mud on them. Everyone else's shoes cost more than my first tractor, and they gleamed under the chandeliers like wet river stones. 200 guests, white orchids I had cut myself at 4 that morning. And my own father lifted his champagne, smiled at the crowd, and called me just a farmer. He thought that was the punchline. He had no idea who was going to walk into his boardroom the following week, or what she would put on the table. Where quiet people finally get the last word, and it is never the one you expect. My name is Emma Harrison, I am 34, and I grow food for a living. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, and be sure to subscribe. At 4 that morning, I was standing in a cold greenhouse with a knife in my hand, cutting the last of the white orchids for my brother's wedding. My breath fogged. The heaters ticked. I trimmed each stem at an angle, wrapped them in damp cloth, and loaded 40 crates into the refrigerated truck myself, because I don't ask my crew to lose sleep for family favors. Every flower in that ballroom came from my soil. So did the heirloom tomatoes in the capris, the baby greens under the seared scallops, the herbs in the sauce nobody could name. I paid for all of it. $40,000, wired quietly through the caterer 3 weeks earlier, on the strict condition that nobody ever learn where it came from. Daniel is my little brother, and Daniel was getting married, and I wanted the day to be beautiful more than I wanted the credit. That is not humility. I want to be honest with you, because this whole story turns on it. I had learned a long time ago that in my family, being seen and being safe were two different things, and I had chosen safe. So I made the wedding perfect, and I made myself invisible, and I stood at the back in muddy boots and let 200 strangers assume I was staff. The caterer, a kind woman named Dolores, caught my eye once from across the room and gave me a small nod, the only person alive who knew. I nodded back. Then I picked a fallen orchid petal off the floor and put it in my pocket, and I told myself that was enough, that the work would speak for itself someday. I really believed that. By midnight, I would stop believing it, and I would never believe it again. To understand my father, you'd have to see the building with his name on it, Harrison Provisions, a food processing and distribution company he founded before I was born, 40 years of packaged sauces and private label groceries, and a downtown office with his portrait in the lobby. My sister Vanessa runs it beside him now, co-CEO, and between them they have decided what the word Harrison means. It means glass towers. It means the right watch. It means a table at the restaurant where the entree costs more than a farm worker earns in a day. My mother, Ruth, never fit that definition, and she never tried to. She grew up on land north of the city, 60 acres of good soil her own father left her, and when she married into money, she kept the deed in her own name like a woman keeping a door unlocked. She used to take me out there on Sundays. She'd press seeds into my palm and say the dirt didn't care what your last name was, only whether you showed up. She died when I was 19. The cancer took 8 months. At the end, she pulled me close in that hospital bed, her hand light as a leaf, and she gave me the land. 60 acres and a warning. Don't ever let anyone price you by the size of their wallet, she said. My father inherited nothing from her but a widower's black suit. Vanessa inherited her ambition and pointed it in the opposite direction. And I inherited the dirt and the name Harrison that had come down her side of the family, not his. That last part matters more than anyone in that ballroom understood. They thought the name belonged to the tower. It belonged to the soil first. Vanessa found me near the coat check before the ceremony, the way a hawk finds a mouse. She was radiant in slate gray silk, 40 years old and sharpened to a point, and she looked me over from my boots to my braid with the patience of a woman appraising damaged goods. "Oh, Emma," she said, reaching out to straighten my collar for me, as if I were a child sent to school unwashed. "You came. In those." Her fingers stopped at my hand and lifted it, turning it over in the light so the two women beside her could see. My palms are a farmer's palms, calloused at the base of every finger, a healed split across the right thumb, ground in soil under 2 nails no brush ever fully reaches. She held my hand up like evidence. "You can wash the dirt off your hands, Emma," she said, smiling so the others would think it was affection. "But everyone can still smell the barn." The women laughed the small laugh that women learn to give powerful women. I took my hand back, slowly, and I didn't wipe it on my dress, though every nerve wanted to. I had spent 15 years earning those calluses. I was not going to be ashamed of them at my own brother's wedding. But something cold moved through me anyway, because I understood then that no version of me would ever be clean enough for her. Not if I bathed in bleach. Not if I sold the farm and bought silk. The dirt she smelled wasn't on my skin. It was in her idea of me, and there was no washing that out. "Save me a seat," I said, and walked to the very back row where I could watch my brother get married without anyone watching me. The ceremony was lovely. Daniel cried when Chloe walked down the aisle, and I cried too, quietly, from the back where nobody keeps score. Then came the reception, and the dinner, and the seat they'd put me at, table 11, near the kitchen doors, between an aunt who forgot my name twice, and a business associate of my father's who did not. He was a genial man, a little drunk, and he asked me the question people ask at weddings. "And what do you do, Emma?" I opened my mouth. My father, 2 seats down, answered before I could. "Emma plays in the dirt," he said, warm and dismissive all at once, the way you'd describe a hobby that got out of hand. "Grows vegetables, sells them at those little markets. We keep hoping she'll get tired of it." The associate chuckled and turned back to his wine, and I sat there with the answer in my mouth. I could have said I supply 4 regional grocery chains. I could have said I employ 31 people year-round and 90 in season. I could have said my greens were on the plate he was eating from at that exact moment. Instead, I smiled and reached for my water, and I let it go, because I had decided long ago that a person who has to announce her worth at a dinner table has already lost the argument. That was the story I told myself anyway. The truth is, I was afraid. Afraid that if I laid it all out and they finally looked impressed, the respect would be for the numbers, not for me, and I would rather have their contempt than their conditional applause. So I stayed quiet. I always stayed quiet. And my father took my quiet as agreement and stood up to give his toast. He tapped his glass with a dessert fork, and the room went soft and attentive the way rooms do for wealthy men. He toasted Daniel and Chloe. He toasted the future. He thanked everyone for coming to a celebration worthy of the Harrison name, and he let his eyes travel the room, the orchids, the crystal, the 8-piece band, and I watched him decide to be clever. "You know," he said, "family means everything to me. All of us together, from the boardroom to—" He found me at table 11 and lifted his glass an inch in my direction. "Well, to the farm." A ripple of chuckles. He was enjoying it now. "My youngest daughter grows vegetables, and bless her, she works hard at it. But I look around at all this," he said, sweeping the glass across the ballroom I had paid for. "And I have to ask, when will a farmer ever afford a wedding like this?" The room laughed. 200 people, the band leader, the aunt beside me, all of them laughing at the girl in the muddy boots, while a camera on a tripod near the cake panned slowly across my face. Every orchid he was gesturing at, I had cut. Every plate had come out of my ground. I had wired $40,000 into this exact evening so my brother would have the day he deserved, and my father stood in the middle of it and asked the room when a farmer could ever afford it. I set down my fork. I did not stand up. I did not correct him. I looked at Daniel, who had gone still at the head table, and I gave my brother the smallest shake of my head. Not now. Not today. But something in me that had been bending for 15 years finally, quietly, broke. Daniel found me 20 minutes later by the kitchen doors, where I'd gone to check that the dessert plating was going out right, an old habit I couldn't switch off even at my own humiliation. He looked wrecked. "Emma, I'm so sorry," he said. "I didn't know he was going to. I should have said something. I should have stood up." He was 29 and gentle, and he had spent his whole life being the peace between our father and everyone else, and I could see the guilt eating him. "It's your wedding day," I told him. "You don't spend it fighting Dad on my behalf." "But the flowers," he said quietly, and my stomach dropped, because I hadn't told him. He saw my face. "Chloe recognized the orchids. She said only one grower around here does the ruffled white ones, And then the caterer let something slip. And, Emma, did you pay for all this? I could have lied. I looked at my brother, at the boy who used to follow me out to Mom's land and fall asleep in the truck bed, and I couldn't. Don't, I said. Don't tell them. Promise me. If they know, it changes what tonight was, and I don't want it to change. He stared at me. You let him say that, in front of everyone, when you... I let him say it, I said, because being right in front of a crowd isn't the same as being loved, and I stopped confusing the two a long time ago. He didn't understand it, not fully, but he nodded, because it was his wedding, and I asked him to. He hugged me hard, smelling of cologne and cake, and went back to his bride. And I got my coat, and I found my truck in a lot full of German cars, and I started the long drive home. It's 90 minutes from the city to the farm, mostly dark highway, and then a county road with no lights. I drove it with the radio off. Somewhere around the halfway mark past the last gas station, I let myself feel it. For 15 years, I had told myself a story, and the story went like this. If I just worked hard enough, grew good enough, built something solid enough, then one day the work would speak so loudly that my father would have to hear it, and he'd look at me the way he looked at Vanessa, and I would finally belong. I had planted that hope like a seed and watered it every season. That night on the county road, I finally understood it was never going to grow. He didn't fail to see my worth. He saw it fine. He'd eaten it off a plate that evening. He just didn't count it, because it came out of the ground instead of a spreadsheet, and no harvest was ever going to change the arithmetic in his head. You can't earn your way out of someone's contempt when the contempt is the whole point. I pulled into my own gravel drive a little after midnight. The farmhouse was dark. The fields stretched out silver under a half moon, 60 acres my mother pressed into my hand while she was dying, and I sat in the truck and looked at them, and let the hope die all the way. Then my phone lit up on the passenger seat. A number I half recognized, an office line, calling at midnight. My father, I thought, and my chest went tight in a way I hated. Calling to apologize, or to twist the knife. I almost let it ring out. Then I answered. It wasn't my father. Emma? It's Sophia. I know it's late. Sophia Reyes runs operations at the farm. 38. Unflappable. The person who keeps the whole machine running when I'm off cutting orchids for ungrateful families. She never calls at midnight. My tiredness dropped away. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Something's right, maybe. I got a call end of day, meant to reach you sooner, but I figured you were at the wedding. She took a breath. Bell and Crane Foods wants to talk. Not a trial order, Emma, the whole thing. A multi-year regional supply contract, produce and specialty greens, exclusive. Their head of sourcing called me directly. I sat up straight in the dark cab. Bell and Crane is not a farmer's market operation. They are a national food company, the kind whose products sit on shelves in every state, the kind that could take everything my farm grows and ask for more. A contract like that doesn't just grow a business, it changes what the business is. When do they want to meet? I asked. Next week. And Emma? She hesitated, which Sophia never does. They said the deal has moving parts. There's a partner company involved on the packaging and distribution side, and the sourcing lead was cagey about who. Big name, apparently. They want everyone in one room to sign the whole structure at once. I stared out at my silver fields. A week ago, this call would have been the best news of my year. Now something cold and precise was moving in my chest, a farmer's instinct for weather she can't yet see. Set the meeting, I said. I'll be there. I hung up and sat in the truck a long time. I told myself the unease was just the late hour. It wasn't. 2 days later, I drove back to the city, this time in clean clothes and a truck that smelled of nothing but coffee, and I met Marcus Bell. He is the CEO of Bell and Crane, in his mid-50s, silver at the temples, with the plain manner of a man too successful to need to perform it. His office had a view of the whole valley. He shook my hand and, I noticed, did not flinch at the calluses. He looked at them for a second, actually, and something like respect crossed his face. So you're the one, he said. I've been eating your tomatoes for 3 years without knowing your name. We sat, and he laid it out straight, which I appreciated. Bell and Crane was expanding a premium fresh line, and they needed a supplier who could hit organic certification, deliver at volume, and do it from within the region so the truck stayed short. He had spent 8 months looking. There are exactly 2 operations in this corridor that can meet the spec, he said. One of them told me last month they're at capacity and won't expand. That leaves you. He slid a folder across the desk. I'll be honest, Ms. Harrison. I don't have a second option. If we do a premium regional line, we do it with Harrison Farms, or we don't do it here at all. I kept my face even, the way I keep it when a buyer thinks he's holding all the cards. But inside, something had shifted, quietly and completely. For 15 years, I'd been the one without leverage, the one who took what the market offered and said thank you. Now a national company was telling me, in a corner office, that the whole plan turned on a name. My name. I opened the folder, and that's when I saw the other party listed on the distribution side. There, on the second page, under Distribution and Co-packing Partner, printed in the same plain font as everything else, was a name I had grown up under. Harrison Provisions, my father's company, my sister's company. Bell and Crane wasn't just buying my produce. They were building a supply chain, and they intended to run it through my father's plant for packaging and distribution, and neither end of that chain knew the other end was me. I must have gone still, because Marcus Bell tilted his head. You know them. I know of them, I said carefully. Good outfit, old company, but they've had a rough couple of years from what I hear. He said it neutrally, but I heard the thing underneath. Later, I'd learn the whole picture, but even then I understood the shape of it. Harrison Provisions was in trouble, 40 years old and slipping, undercut by cheaper competitors, carrying too much debt, and this Bell and Crane contract wasn't a nice new account for my father. It was a lifeline. Without the volume this deal would pump through his plant, the company my father built, the company that let him stand in a ballroom and pity me, might not survive the year. And the whole thing depended on a supplier only I could provide. I closed the folder. My hands were steady. Inside, I was anything but. For 15 years, I had kept my 2 lives in separate fields, the farm on one side, the family on the other, and I had worked very hard to make sure they never touched. Now Marcus Bell had drawn a line straight between them, in ink, and asked me to sign it. If you have ever had family look right through you, like your work was invisible, stay with me. What happened in that boardroom still gives me chills. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the turn. I drove home that night with the folder on the passenger seat like a live thing, and I thought about my mother. She'd been gone 15 years, but I could still hear her in the greenhouse, still feel the particular grip of her hand at the end. That last week she was mostly asleep, but one afternoon she was clear, clearer than she'd been in days, and she made me sit on the edge of the hospital bed. She wasn't worried about the farm. She knew I'd work. She was worried about the rest of them. Your father is a good man who got scared of being poor a long time ago, she said, and fear that old turns into something else. It turns into a way of seeing. He'll measure you by what you can show, because that's the only ruler he trusts. And your sister learned it from him before she could walk. She squeezed my hand. Don't argue with the ruler, Emma. You'll never win. Just refuse to be measured by it. I was 19. I thought I understood. I didn't. Not really. Not until I was 34 with a folder on my truck seat that could save the very people who'd measured me and found me wanting. My mother handed me 60 acres and 1 sentence, and it took me 15 years and a wedding toast to finally hear the sentence right. Don't argue with the ruler. Refuse to be measured by it. There is a difference, it turns out, between the two, and I had spent my whole adult life doing the first while telling myself I was doing the second. I pulled into the drive. The fields were black and quiet. And for the first time, I let myself ask the question I'd been avoiding since Marcus Bell slid that folder across his desk. What was I going to do with this? That Sunday was the anniversary of my mother's death, and every year, whatever else is broken between us, my father hosts a dinner for it. I almost didn't go, but I wanted to see him before the meeting, wanted to understand what I was walking into, so I put on a plain dress and drove in. The house was all polished surfaces and no warmth. Vanessa was there, on her phone. Daniel and Chloe, back from their honeymoon, quiet. And my father, thinner than at the wedding, with a gray cast to his skin I hadn't noticed under the ballroom lights. He was drinking more than usual. Halfway through dinner, loosened by wine and unable to help himself, he started talking about the company, the way he does, as if we were shareholders. "We're on the edge of something big," he announced. "Biggest contract in the company's history. National distributor, premium line. It closes next week and it puts Harrison Provisions back where it belongs." Vanessa shot him a look. The look that means don't air the laundry, but he waved it off. "It's family. They should know we're going to be fine." He didn't say we were drowning. He didn't have to. A man who announces he's about to be saved is a man who knows how close he came to going under. He raised his glass. To Ruth. To the company. To the future. And he never once looked at me and thought to ask what I'd been up to lately. I sat at his table and listened to my father describe the deal that would save his life, with no idea that the supplier he was counting on, the one name the whole thing rested on, was sitting 3 feet away eating his overcooked roast in silence. I said nothing. I had gotten very good at saying nothing, but I was starting to understand what my silence was worth. That night, I couldn't sleep. I got up at 2, made coffee, and spread the whole Bell and Crane contract across my kitchen table, all 40 pages, and I read it the way I read a field before planting, looking for what the surface didn't show. And there it was, cleaner than I'd let myself see in Marcus Bell's office. The entire deal was a chain, and a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and I was not the weak link. I was the link nobody could replace. Bell and Crane needed a certified organic supplier at volume in this corridor, and there was one. Me. My father needed the distribution volume this contract would send through his plant, or his company folded. And that volume only existed if there was produce to distribute, and the only produce was mine. Marcus Bell had built the whole structure so that everyone signed at once, in one room, and if the supplier walked, the whole thing collapsed, and my father's lifeline collapsed with it. I read it 3 times, sitting there in the dark with my hands wrapped around a cold mug. The whole thing came down to one name on the supplier line, and that name was mine. I want to be careful here, because I know how this sounds. I did not feel triumphant. I felt sick, actually. And then quiet. And then something steadier underneath, like ground firming up after rain. My father had stood in a ballroom and asked when a farmer would ever afford a wedding like his. And the answer, the whole time, was sitting in a farmhouse kitchen at 2 in the morning, holding the single page that decided whether he kept his company at all. He'd asked the wrong question. The right one was whether he could afford to keep insulting the only person who could save him. Vanessa called me on Tuesday. I almost didn't recognize the number because Vanessa does not call me. Texts, occasionally, usually to coordinate a family obligation she wants me to handle. But this was a call, and her voice had the bright, brisk warmth she uses on people she needs something from. "Emma, listen, I know you've got your little farm thing, but are you free Thursday and Friday?" I said I might be. "It's just, we're doing a big cleanup at the plant, reorganizing the cold storage warehouse before a client walked through, and we're short bodies." I thought, well, you're used to physical work, hauling and lifting and all that, and honestly, you'd probably be faster than the temps. I could get you 20 an hour? Cash? She said it like she was doing me a favor. My sister, co-CEO of a company about to be saved by my signature, was offering me $20 an hour to stack boxes for the client walkthrough. And the client, though she didn't know it, was the same deal that ran through my fields. "You want me to clean your warehouse," I said, "for the client walkthrough." "It'd mean a lot," she said. "And, it'd be nice to have you around. We never see you." Then, softer, the knife wrapped in wool. "You can wash the dirt off your hands, Emma, but you might as well put them to good use." She laughed like it was a joke. I didn't. I stood in my greenhouse with the phone to my ear and looked out at rows and rows of the produce her company was praying to distribute, and I understood that she genuinely could not conceive of me as anything but hired hands. Not a rival. Not a peer. Certainly not the woman whose name was on the supplier line. "I'll think about it," I said, and hung up, and I thought about it very differently than she meant. I told Sophia about it the next morning, over coffee in the farm office, both of us watching the crews load the day's harvest. She listened to the whole thing, the wedding toast, the folder, the warehouse offer, and when I finished, she set down her mug and said the thing I'd been afraid to say to myself. "So don't sign." I looked at her. "You heard me," she said. "Emma, these people have spent your whole life stepping on you. Now the one deal that saves them happens to run through your gate and you're agonizing about it. Let them sink. Bell will find another way, or he won't. But either way, your father's company folding is not your problem to solve. You don't owe them your name." And she wasn't wrong. That was the trouble. Everything she said was true and clean and fair, and part of me wanted it badly, wanted to sit in my farmhouse and let the tower crumble and feel nothing but the quiet. But I kept seeing things I didn't want to see. The 200 people my father employs, the line workers, the drivers, the woman at the front desk who's been there since I was a kid. They didn't toast at any wedding. They'd just lose their jobs. And under that, deeper, uglier, I saw the truth about myself. If I let them sink, I'd be measuring them exactly the way they measured me, deciding a person's fate by whether they deserved it in my eyes. I'd win the argument by becoming the ruler. My mother's voice again. Don't argue with the ruler. Don't become it either. I don't know yet, I told Sophia, but letting them drown so I can feel righteous, that's not refusing to be measured. That's just measuring back. Sophia studied me. "You're a better person than me," she said. "No," I said. "I just had a better mother." I decided to go to the meeting. I still didn't know exactly what I'd do when I got there, whether I'd sign, whether I'd walk, whether I'd say a word about who I was before Marcus Bell did it for me, but I knew I had to be in that room, as myself, and let whatever happened happen in the open instead of in the dark where I'd been hiding my whole life. The night before, I did something I couldn't fully explain even to myself. I went out to the cutting garden at dusk and I cut flowers. Not the show orchids, not the wedding whites, the wildflowers my mother had planted along the north fence 30 years ago, and I'd never had the heart to plow under. Black-eyed Susans, coneflower, Queen Anne's lace, the scrappy, unfashionable blooms that grow where you don't fuss over them. I cut an armful and wrapped the stems and set them on the passenger seat of the truck, next to the folder. I wasn't going to hand them to anyone. I wasn't going to make a speech about them. I just wanted something of my mother's in the room, something that had come out of the ground and asked nobody's permission to be beautiful. Sophia found me doing it and raised an eyebrow. "Flowers to a contract signing?" "Flowers to a contract signing," I said. She didn't ask why. She's known me long enough to know that some things I do with my hands before my head has caught up. I loaded the truck that night so I wouldn't have time to talk myself out of it in the morning. Folder, flowers, a clean shirt, my mother's ruler still ringing in my ears. Then I stood in the dark yard a while and looked at the fields, and I made myself a promise about what kind of person would walk into that room. Then I went to bed and didn't sleep. There was one thing I had to do first, and it was the thing that made everything else real. Marcus Bell's office had sent a logistics email that morning, confirming the signing meeting, listing attendees, asking each party to confirm their principal signatory. For 15 years, I had done business behind a curtain. The farm operated as an LLC, contracts went out under E. Harrison, and when a buyer wanted a face across the table, I sent Sophia, and I let people assume the owner was some man named Harrison who preferred to stay off the road. The one place my full name lived in the open was the Organic Certification Registry, a federal database anyone could search. And that was how Bell's sourcing team had traced their way to Harrison Farms in the first place, a single line reading Emma Harrison among the certified growers. But a name in a database is not a face in a room, and every time a buyer wanted the face, they got Sophia. It had kept my two worlds apart. It had kept me safe. And now Bell and Crane wanted the principal signatory confirmed by name, in writing, for a meeting my father and my sister would be sitting in. I read the email 4 times. My cursor sat blinking in the reply box for a long time. If I typed my name, if I confirmed that Emma Harrison, owner of Harrison Farms, would personally attend, then the curtain came down for good. My father would see. My sister would see. Everyone in that glass tower would know exactly what the girl in the muddy boots had built while they weren't looking, and there would be no putting it back in the dark. I thought about my mother's door she kept unlocked. I thought about 15 years of being invisible on purpose and calling it dignity. And I typed it. Emma Harrison, owner, Harrison Farms, will attend and sign on behalf of the supplier. I read it once more. Then I hit send, and I felt the click of it go out into the world, irreversible, like a gate swinging shut behind you on a road you can't walk back up. Whatever I had been protecting all these years, I had just given it up on purpose. There was no unsending it. And strangely, for the first time in weeks, I could breathe. I told Sophia that afternoon that I'd be going in alone. She'd been my face for years, the one who sat across from the buyers, the buffer between me and every room where I didn't want to be seen. And she looked at me for a long moment and understood before I finished the sentence. You don't want me there. It's not that, I said. It's that if you're there, I'll hide behind you. I always have. You walk in first and I read the room from the back, and that's exactly the thing I'm done doing. She nodded slowly. There was something in her face I hadn't expected. Not hurt exactly, but the particular quiet of watching someone step off a ledge you can't step off with them. You've never signed a big one without me in the room, she said. I know. You sure? No, I said, and we both almost laughed. But I'm doing it anyway. She squeezed my shoulder, the way she does, and then she said the thing I needed. For what it's worth, boss, you built this. Not the LLC, not the paperwork. You, with your hands. Whatever happens in that room, that part's already true, and nobody in it can vote on it. I drove home that night, back to the dark farmhouse, and the truck felt very empty with just me and the folder and the wildflowers wilting slightly on the seat. For years, I'd had a shield, a system, a way of being present without being exposed. I'd just set all of it down. Tomorrow, I would walk into my father's world with nothing between me and them but the truth, and the truth had never once protected me before. But I was 34, and my mother was 15 years gone, and I was finally done being invisible. Whatever it cost me, I was done. Daniel called me the night before the meeting. He didn't know about any of it. The contract, the folder, that I was the supplier his father was praying to. He just called because he'd been worried about me since the wedding, my sweet brother, and he wanted to hear my voice. We talked about the honeymoon, about Chloe, about nothing, and then he got quiet and said, Dad's a mess right now. The company. I don't think he knows I know, but Chloe overheard him on the phone. He said if this deal next week falls through, they're done. Layoffs, the whole thing. He said there's some supplier holding all the cards and he can't even get a meeting with them until the signing, and it's driving him crazy. Some hard-nose who won't take his calls. I closed my eyes in the dark of my kitchen. Some hard-nose, I said. Yeah. He's terrified of them, honestly. First time I've ever heard Dad scared of anybody. I could have told him right then. My brother, on the phone, handing me the perfect opening. I opened my mouth, and the words were right there. It's me, Daniel. I'm the supplier. I'm the hard-nosed Dad's afraid of. And I closed it again, because I'd made him promise not to tell them about the wedding, and I wasn't going to put him in the middle of this too. Wasn't going to make him carry my secret into that house. Emma? He said. You still there? I'm here, I said. Get some sleep. Tell Dad it'll work out. You think it will? I looked out at my fields, silver again under the same half-moon that had watched me lose hope on the county road 2 weeks before. I think, I said slowly, that everybody's about to find out what they're really worth. I hung up before he could ask what I meant. I couldn't stay in the house after that, so I put on my boots and walked out into the fields in the dark. It was cold and clear, and the rows ran out ahead of me into the black, and I walked them the way I've walked them 10,000 times, and I let myself finally ask the real question, not what I would do in that room. I mostly knew that. The real question was underneath, the one my mother had been trying to get me to ask on her deathbed. What did I actually want? For 15 years, I told myself I wanted to be left alone, to work in peace, to not need their approval. But standing in my mother's field at midnight, I finally caught the lie in it. I hadn't stopped wanting their approval. I'd just stopped asking for it out loud, because asking and being refused hurt worse than the silence. I'd hidden my whole life not out of dignity, but out of a 19-year-old's flinch, still bracing against a no. And tomorrow, my father was going to hand me the yes. He was going to see the farm, see the numbers, see everything, and he was going to be impressed at last, because now I was useful. Now I was worth something on his ruler. And here was the thing I had to be sure of before I walked in. If he offered me the belonging I'd wanted my whole life, offered it now that I was finally valuable to him, would I still want it? Or would I finally understand that a love that arrives only when you're useful isn't love arriving? It's a bill coming due. I stood in the dark a long time. The wind moved through the coneflower. And somewhere out there in my mother's field, I found my answer. And it wasn't the one 19-year-old me would have given. The morning of the meeting, I dressed the way I'd decided to dress, which was like myself. A clean chambray shirt, dark jeans, my good boots scrubbed of mud but unmistakably work boots, the leather cracked from real use. No silk, no borrowed armor. I braided my hair back the way I do for the fields. I looked in the mirror, and I did not see a woman dressed up to impress a boardroom. I saw a farmer, and that was the entire point. I put the wildflowers in a mason jar of water on the passenger seat and drove the 90 minutes to the city with the windows cracked and the radio off, and I did not rehearse a speech, because I wasn't going in there to perform. Bell and Crane's headquarters was a tower of glass downtown, 40 stories, the kind of building my father respects on sight. I parked my mud-crusted truck between two black sedans in the visitor garage and carried my mason jar of Queen Anne's lace across a marble lobby, and I watched people's eyes slide off me, the woman in work boots holding weeds, clearly lost, clearly staff. The receptionist directed me to the 38th floor. In the elevator, alone, I looked at my reflection in the brushed steel doors and I breathed. Somewhere on that floor, in a glass conference room, my father and my sister were already sitting, waiting for a supplier they'd never met. The hard-nose holding all the cards, with no idea the cards had been in their own family the whole time. They'd been waiting 15 years to see me clearly. They were about to. The elevator climbed. My hands were steady around the jar, steadier than they'd been in the farmhouse. Whatever this cost me, I was walking in as the person my mother made, not the person my father named. The doors opened. Vanessa spotted me in the hallway before I reached the conference room. She was standing outside the glass doors with a young assistant reviewing something on a tablet, dressed in the sharpest suit I'd ever seen her wear, and when she looked up and saw me, her face did something complicated. Confusion first, then a kind of horror, then fast, the smooth contempt she wears like foundation. "Emma," she hissed, crossing to me, lowering her voice so the assistant wouldn't hear. "What are you doing here? How did you even... Did Dad tell you where we were?" She took my arm and steered me away from the glass, away from the room. "This is the most important meeting in the company's history. You cannot be here right now. I don't know what you thought if you came to ask him for money or... God, is this about the wedding? This is not the time." I let her steer me. I looked down at her hand on my arm, the manicured fingers, and then up at her face, tight with panic and something underneath the panic that I finally recognized as fear, the same fear I'd heard in my father's voice through Daniel. She thought I'd come to embarrass her. She thought I was a problem to be managed out of the hallway before the real people arrived. "You can wash the dirt off your hands, Emma," she said, echoing herself without knowing it, quieter now, almost pleading. "But not today, please. Not in front of these people. Just go home. I'll call you after." The assistant appeared at her elbow. "Ms. Harrison, they're ready to start. Mr. Bell is asking for the supplier's representative." Vanessa turned to answer. I stepped past her, toward the glass doors, and said, "That's me." The conference room was all glass and pale wood, a long table, the valley spread out 40 floors below. My father sat at the far end in his best suit, gray-faced, hands folded, the posture of a man about to beg, dressed up as a man about to negotiate. There were lawyers, an aide from Bell and Crane, place cards at each seat printed in small serif type, And there, halfway down the table on the supplier's side, a card that read Harrison Farms in front of an empty chair. I walked to it. I set my mason jar of wildflowers on the polished table, right there among the leather folios and the water glasses, weeds from my mother's fence line in a boardroom 40 stories up. And I pulled out the chair and I sat down in the seat that said Harrison Farms, because it was mine. The room went quiet in stages. My father saw me and his face did a slow, terrible thing, first not understanding, his daughter in the supplier's chair. Some mistake. Then the beginning of understanding. Then a pallor that went all the way to his lips. Vanessa had followed me in and stopped dead just inside the door. She looked at the place card. She looked at me, sitting behind it. And I watched the whole architecture of her afternoon collapse behind her eyes. Nobody spoke. The aide shuffled papers. My father opened his mouth and closed it. And in that suspended, ringing silence, with my mother's flowers on the table and my calloused hands folded exactly like his, I felt no triumph, only a strange and level calm, the calm of a person who has finally stopped hiding and discovered the sky didn't fall. Then the far door opened and Marcus Bell walked in. Marcus Bell came in the way powerful men come into rooms they own, without hurry, buttoning his jacket, already scanning for the faces that mattered. He nodded to his own team. He gave my father a courteous, businesslike nod, the nod you give a partner you're about to save. And then his eyes found me, sitting behind the Harrison Farms card with a jar of wildflowers in front of me, and his whole manner changed. He crossed the room toward my end of the table, not my father's, and my father watched him come, watched the most important man in the deal walk past him to get to the farmer, and I saw my father begin to understand that he had gotten something very wrong, and had gotten it wrong out loud, at a wedding, in front of 200 people. Marcus Bell reached my chair. He extended his hand, and this time he didn't just tolerate the calluses. He clasped my hand in both of his, warmly, the way you greet the person who makes the whole thing possible. The room held its breath. My sister's knuckles were white on the back of a chair. My father had not moved, and Marcus Bell looked straight at me, in front of all of them, and said the words that would echo in that family for the rest of their lives. "It's an honor," Marcus Bell said, "to finally meet the owner of Harrison Farms." The silence in that room was total. I have stood in fields during the dead quiet before a storm, that heavy hush when even the birds stop, and it was like that. My father's mouth had come open. Vanessa made a small sound, not a word, just breath. Bell, oblivious to the earthquake he'd set off, kept going, because to him, this was simple business. "Ms. Harrison, I've been trying to get in a room with you for 2 months. Your operation is the entire reason this deal exists. There isn't another supplier in this state who could carry what we're building. And believe me, we looked." He turned, gesturing down the table toward my father, still gracious, still with no idea. "Mr. Harrison, I understand you two share the name. Family connection? Small world. Well, it's a good name to have on both ends of a supply chain." Nobody laughed. My father was staring at me as if I'd walked in wearing a stranger's face, and in a way I had, because the face he'd assigned me 15 years ago, the girl who played in the dirt, had never been mine. And now it was falling off in front of him and he had no idea what was underneath. Vanessa finally spoke, and her voice came out wrong, too high. "You're... Emma? You're the supplier?" "I'm the supplier," I said. My voice was completely level, the same voice I used to quote a price on tomatoes. "Harrison Farms, 60 acres north of the city, 31 people year-round, 90 in season. Organic certified for 11 years. I looked at my father. Mom's land, the dirt I play in. I watched Vanessa recover in real time, and it was almost impressive, the speed of it. The horror in her face reorganized itself into something oily and quick, and she smiled, and she turned to Marcus Bell with the polished warmth she'd used on those women at the wedding. "Well, isn't this wonderful?" she said. "My little sister. We are so proud of what Emma's built. She's always been the hard-working one in the family, hasn't she, Dad? We've supported her farm from the very beginning." She was doing it right in front of me, rewriting the whole history in the space of a breath, turning 15 years of contempt into a story about a supportive family and their salt-of-the-earth daughter, claiming the credit for a thing she'd spent that very week offering me $20 an hour to clean her warehouse. Belle nodded politely, not knowing, not caring, and I felt the old pull, the almost overwhelming urge to lay it out, to tell Marcus Bell and the lawyers and the whole glass room exactly what this family had said to me at a wedding 2 weeks ago, to hold up the toast the way Vanessa had held up my hand, as evidence, and watch them shrink. I had the floor. I had the leverage. I could have burned them down to the studs and been justified, but I heard my mother. Don't argue with the ruler, don't become it. Humiliating them would just be Vanessa's move, run in the other direction. Same weapon, same game, and I'd have won it by becoming exactly what I hated. So I didn't. I let Vanessa's revision sit there unchallenged, and I turned to Marcus Bell, and I said in that same level voice, "Should we talk about the terms?" We talked about the terms. I'll spare you the paper. 3 years, exclusive regional supply, roughly $18 million in total value across the contract, with Harrison Provisions handling packaging and distribution on the back end. As Bell laid out the structure, I watched my father finally do the math he should have done 15 years ago. Every number Bell said was a number that ran through my fields first, and I saw my father understand, at last, that the deal saving his company was a deal I could kill with a word, and that I had every reason in the world to say it. When Bell finished, he looked around the table. "So, are we all comfortable moving to signatures?" And my father spoke for the first time. His voice was not the voice from the ballroom. It was small, and it shook. "Emma." Everyone turned. He was looking at me down the length of that table, and his eyes were wet, and I did not know if it was fear or shame, or something realer underneath both. "Emma, He stopped, started again. "I want you to come into the company, properly, not just this contract. Bring the farm in, put your name on the door beside mine, Harrison and Harrison. You've earned it. You've more than earned it. Whatever I said, whatever I want to make it right. Come home. Let me give you what you should have had all along." And there it was. The thing I'd wanted since I was 19 years old, laid on the polished table between the water glasses and my mother's wildflowers. My father, asking me home, offering me the name on the door, the belonging, the place at the table. Everything the girl in the muddy boots had ached for at the back of that ballroom. All I had to do was say yes. I sat with it. The room waited. And in the waiting, Vanessa did something none of us expected. She spoke, and her voice had lost all its polish, gone low and raw, almost to herself. He never said it to me. Everyone looked at her. She was staring at the table. 30 years I ran beside him, built the company, made the numbers, closed every deal, and he never once told me I'd done a good job. Not once. She looked up at me, and for a single unguarded second there was no contempt in her face at all, just a tired, hollow envy. And I saw her whole life in it. She had chased our father's ruler because it was the only language he spoke, had made herself sharp and shining and cold to earn a sentence he was never going to say. And here he was, saying the nearest thing to it, to me, the sister who'd refused to play. She wasn't the author of the family's cruelty. She was its oldest victim, still bleeding from the same wound, still measuring herself with the same ruler that had cut us both. I almost felt sorry for her. Then I turned back to my father, and I understood exactly what I was choosing. He wasn't offering me love. He was offering me a promotion. The door, the name, the welcome, all of it arriving the very minute I became useful, the very minute my worth showed up on his ledger. If I said yes, I'd finally belong, at the price of agreeing that his ruler was right all along, that I'd been worth nothing until I was worth $18 million. That was the trade, belonging, in exchange for my mother's whole warning. "No," I said. Just that, at first, quiet. My father flinched. "I'll sign the contract. Your people keep their jobs, all 200 of them, and I'm glad to do it. And this isn't revenge. But I won't come into the company, and I won't put my name on your door." I stood and I picked up my mother's jar of wildflowers, and I said the thing I'd driven 90 minutes to say without knowing it. I already have a gate. My mother built it. And it opens for anyone willing to get their hands dirty. I signed the contract first. I want to be clear about that, because it mattered to me that the order be right. I sat back down and I read every page the way my mother taught me, and I signed on the supplier's line, Emma Harrison, owner, in front of all of them. And I shook Marcus Bell's hand and told him I looked forward to the work. Then I gathered my folder. My father was still trying to find words, and Vanessa was staring at the table, and the lawyers were pretending very hard to read their phones. I left the wildflowers where they were, in their mason jar in the middle of that polished table, weeds from my mother's fence line 40 floors above the city, because I wanted them to have to look at something honest for the rest of the meeting. I walked toward the door. Emma. My father's voice behind me cracked down the middle. Emma, please. I stopped. I didn't turn around, but I stopped. One hand on the glass door, and I gave him the only thing I had left to give, which was the truth said gently. You didn't lose me at the wedding, Dad, I said. You lost me a long time before that. But the gate's open. It always was. You just have to be willing to walk out to where I actually am. Then I pushed the door and walked through it, past Vanessa's stunned assistant, past the receptionist who'd taken me for lost, into the elevator, down 40 floors, across the marble lobby in my work boots, and out into the afternoon sun. My truck was still parked crooked between the two black sedans. I got in. I put my hands on the wheel, the calloused hands that started all of this, and I sat for a second and breathed. Then I drove home. 90 minutes, radio off, the whole valley greening up outside the window. And I did not cry, and I was not sad. I was free. The contract held. Harrison Provisions got its lifeline, the trucks kept running, and the 200 people I'll probably never meet kept their jobs, which is the only part of saving my father that I've never once regretted. My father and I don't talk much. He sent a letter, actual paper, 3 weeks later, and it wasn't an apology so much as a man trying to learn a language late in life, clumsy and incomplete. And I wrote back, because a cracked door is still a door. He hasn't walked out to the farm yet, but he drove by once, in the fall. Sophia saw his sedan slow down at the gate and idle there a long minute, my father looking up the lane at the fields and the greenhouses and the sign I'd finally hung, and then he drove on. He wasn't ready. I left the gate open anyway. Vanessa surprised me most. A month after the meeting she texted, and it wasn't a favor, and it wasn't a barb. It was short, and I know it cost her everything. It said only that the wedding flowers had been beautiful, and that she was sorry. That's all. We are not close. We may never be. But she'd finally seen the flowers, and coming from Vanessa, that was practically a bouquet. And Daniel. My brother started coming out to the farm on weekends that spring, first just to help, then because he liked it, and by summer he was asking real questions about soil and seasons and how you make a thing grow. Last month he told me he and Chloe are thinking about moving out this way. He wants his kids to grow up knowing which end of a seed goes down. The ruler that measured us all. The one my father trusted and my sister served. It's still out there. I didn't destroy it. But it's not getting handed down anymore. Not through this gate. I hung a small wooden sign at the entrance that spring. Nothing fancy, just my mother's words burned into a plank of cedar I cut myself. And here is the one thing 15 years and a boardroom taught me. The thing I'd give you if you've ever been priced by someone's wallet. Respect you have to buy was never respect at all. It was rent. And I was finally done paying it. That's how a farmer got the last word. Not with a bigger house, not by burning anyone down. Just by refusing, at last, to be measured by a ruler that was never mine. The muddy boots, the toast, the name I would not put on his door. If someone in your life